Welcome to Money Convos, where we discuss personal finance and investment tips. We're committed to helping people create wealth and achieve financial freedom. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, and Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube and podcast. All right then, let's head into today's conversation.
We have just joined. Bishop, how are you doing?
Charlie, Elikem, I'm good. Yourself?
I'm great. Charlie, can you see that we have a...
So I will be on mute for a while.
Oh, okay. All right. No problem. We have a very well-missed or dearly missed guest in our audience. Paulina, nice to see you in the audience. I hope you are doing well. You can just send a shout out by reaction so we know you are there. Anyway, so today we are talking about our dear country, Ghana, and our economy. Since some time I think about this time last year, that's when things started going south. It was in July last year, things started going south. We defaulted on our loans, and it's motivated a series that we've been having about alternative other investment options people can think about, including entrepreneurship or investing in Ghanaian businesses. But recently, the Minister of Finance gave a speech, and by way of the 2023 budget review, and it gives us a chance to assess the state of the economy. So we've invited our brilliant economist friend, Courage Buti, to join us here today to give us some of the highlights and get into some details of certain things that will be affecting your money situation. So, Courage, welcome once again to Money Convos. Courage, I think you are muted.
Thank you, bro. Thank you.
Wonderful.
I've been missing for a while.
Yes, you have been trying to solve all of our country's problems. I know you are working tirelessly.
It's well.
So, Courage, the budget review was read. Perhaps if we could give us a brief summary of the things that are important. That speech can get a bit boring, I know, but that matter to us. Any information that you can share?
Well, yeah. Good evening to us, house. Paulina, Edem, those are the ones I could readily see, Elikem yourself, and probably those I cannot see. Good evening. Grateful for the opportunity again. So yes, the mid-year thing is a tradition now. It's required before the end of February, July. We take stock of our economy, what is going right, what is going wrong, and if there is a need for adjustment, we do so we can keep the fiscal targets. For our purpose as investors, I think what matters a lot to us will be the macros and then the fiscal side of the things and the monetary policy, things that can affect our investments really. So that is where I'll focus a lot more on. I won't go into a lot of the real sector stuff and the flagship programs and projects and stuff like that, because they might not be too much of interest for our purpose really. If you remember, 2022, in fact, it's fresh on our mind, was quite a turbulent year with inflation soaring, exchange rate pressures, interest rate, Ghana losing access to the international market, portfolio reversals, and the issues related really. We didn't have the full picture of 2022 fiscal performance until the mid-year review, because they've not even updated that data on their website. So I just gleaned through that data to get a sense of what the real issues were for 2022. And again, casting your mind back, in September 2021, the IMF did an Article 4 consultation and flagged a number of issues, including risk of our debts becoming unsustainable, and prescribed that we adopt some macroprudential policies to try to rein in a debt and then avert maybe a full-blown debt crisis really. Most of those calls went unheeded, and we could see it from the full year 2022 numbers. The fiscal targets we set ourselves were exceeded by far. Expenditure targets were exceeded, revenue targets underperformed, even if it recovered a bit in the second half of the year to make up for the huge shortfalls we saw in the first half of the year. The expenditure controls were not commensurate, and indeed we exceeded our expenditure targets and most of the line items of expenditure by far really. No wonder in December 2022, we saw the rate of depreciation we saw, and then the level of agitation in the system prior to the what do you call it, the debt exchange, and of course the IMF as staff level agreement and things like that. Why was it really so? In November, we presented another budget for 2023, which was the one they reviewed not long ago. In that budget, it sounded more like another expansionary budget. Deficit of over 60 billion, interest payment alone taking about 52 or so billion. Apex was in double digits. And a number of other things that did not really suggest that we are just ready to do some consolidation or consider the interest of investors. And the Bank of Ghana governor in the MPC report couldn't put it any better that 2022 fiscal position was not what investors expected, and that was what triggered most of the reactions we saw. So you saw droves of repatriation in Q4, and particularly in December, you saw speculation that led to a lot of FX purchases, and then things related really, which invariably shot inflation out of the roof and things like that. So by extension, the things we failed to do in 2022 from the very beginning to the very end were the reasons we suffered what we suffered. Yes, there was risk of debt unsustainability, but then we fueled it further with our budget execution, the fiscal position, and then the posturing in general towards the plight of investors. And so when you announce this restructuring and the many other things that were accompanying it, but then your fiscal posture doesn't show one that is willing to consolidate, you leave investors with no choice but to look for their own safety. And that was exactly what we did in 2022. So 2023, the targets were ambitious, like I said, revenue growth of over 47% was what they expected, even if the revenue measures proposed were quite broad-based. 47% growth in revenue was just too ambitious. And of course, on the back of that, we saw the huge expenditure, which was crossing into the total appropriation of about 200 or so billion, or almost 200 billion, really. So again, you saw the drift in January, where the CD plummeted quite significantly, 20% depreciation in January. But I think thereafter, and after the launch of the debt exchange program, the IMF board's approval of our program, things started to change. And the updated numbers are how fear shows that under program and under the supervision of IMF, we have tried to be a lot more disciplined. Again, revenue fell short significantly for the first half year, but we've seen an even more than commensurate cut in expenditure. So revenue shortfall was about, I think about 8 or so billion, and we saw expenditure cut that was almost 20 or so billion. So 26% shortfall relative to what the target for the period was, which more than compensated for the revenue underperformance in the first half year. And we ended up with fiscal targets like your deficit, primary balance, almost all of them well ahead of what the period's target was. For instance, we're targeting a primary deficit on a cash basis of, I think about primary deficit on cash basis of about 4.4% of GDP. We ended up the period, I think, with 1.8% of GDP, significantly below that. We recorded a primary surplus against a target of a zero primary balance on commitment basis. And you look at most of the other metrics of fiscal performance, really, we were significantly ahead of what the previous target was. We're performing better than what the previous target was. Which says one thing. Under program, we are almost always a well-behaved country. We respect the rules and we follow them strictly. Outside of a program, discipline is lacking, and that is what almost always brings us back to the IMF program. On the monetary side of things, the position of IMF on our monetary policy administration is that we need to keep it tight until inflation is brought back within control. And they've set something they call the monetary policy consultation clause, which sets basically target for inflation for each of the periods, upper band, lower band. And then we must use our interest rate regime as a monetary policy regime to try to control inflation within that band and bring it back to the 6 to 10% target band by the end of the program, which is somewhere in 2026. And so if we must achieve that, the requirement was avoid deficit financing of the central government. And as a half year, the indication is there was no such deficit monetization from the central bank, among a number of other structural issues, including reviewing the Bank of Ghana Act and a number of other things related, most of which are really on course. So again, on the monetary side, we are well behaved. And just to cast us back a bit, it was not a surprise at all. I mean, in hindsight now, the level of inflation pressure we suffered last year, because one of the revelations from the budgetary updated 2022 numbers was the size of deficit monetization. Even in the face of the central bank tightening policy rate, we increased it all the way to, I think, 29 or 28% by end of year. But then while we were tightening seriously, we were also undoing it through liquidity injection for the bank of the central government. And we had a lot of that in 2022, which underscored the inflation problem we had, really. But in 2023, so far, there has been zero. And then there are clear targets set under the program. I think the inflation target under the consultation clause for 2023, the upper target is about 45.1 or so percent. So at 43.1, we are largely within that target. But inflation is on an uptick, and we are getting closer and closer to that again. So that is a point where they must watch. And the indication from there, if anything is to go by, will be that for as long as inflation remains a risk, so the Central Monetary Policy Committee will keep tightening. So that was also one revelation we got from that side. And to now align the budget properly to what the program targets were or is, which was a concern for me at the start of the year, that the targets were just ambitious, expenditure was overboard, revenue assumptions were unreal, and we may end up missing them significantly. Now, I think the government has seen sense to revise those numbers. So we've seen a revision downwards in the revenue expectations, expenditure expectations, total appropriation for the period, and that trickled into some improved deficit positions and a primary balance position, which largely now I believe aligns to what the IMF program targets are for this period. And so on the macro and fiscal side of things, that was really what they did. In terms of growth expectation, again, as expected, under the program with the consolidation going on the fiscal side, the monetary tightening and lack of policy support from the monetary side to stimulate growth, and then the general unfavorable debt market conditions, which means you may not be able to easily get money to do some of the programs and projects. We expected that growth to be depressed. Government was looking at 2.8% growth from the start of the year. Now they've brought it to 1.5%, both oil and non-oil growth. Inflation, they were expecting something in the region of 18% initially. Now they've increased it to about 31% on that front. Reserves, now they expect us to end the year with about 0.8 months of import cover, which is woefully inadequate relative to what our needs are and what the recent figures have been. We were around 5 months of import cover at some point in 2021, really. So it just tells you how low things are falling and the need to consciously rebuild. And that is why I think that the whole comment about we have turned the corner was really unnecessary. Even if inflation had declined from 54 to wherever it is now, inflation at 43.1 is still very high and problematic. But then in summary, just the point I was making is that we seem to have moved on from the 2022 numbers, which were quite gloomy. Deficit performance looks way better now, ahead of what the target for the period is, and the revisions to the fiscal framework now properly aligns to the program frameworks of the IMF, in fact the program target of the IMF, and we seem to be on course for a successful first review in September, given we have largely met most of the quantitative and then structural benchmarks for that review, really. And it is this impressive consolidation, of course, which we expect will slow down a bit in second half year because it was front loaded. It is these things, if we sustain, that would bring back the macro stability we need and the basis for accelerated growth going forward, really. So we can only expect that in the second half of the year and the subsequent years, the Treasury sustains this effort, this kind of effort towards fiscal consolidation so that we can get the economy back on track and their sustainability also back on track as soon as possible. Yeah, we can go into the interactions now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Courage, for giving us this overview. Always helping explain these things to us better. So just following on from some of the themes you discussed, a lot of the comparison you made was about the actual numbers versus targets. I remember last year when this budget was read, it seemed very ambitious. In fact, this government has been coming up with pretty ambitious targets. Mm-hmm. Are we meeting those targets, those ambitious targets?
Not really. I mean, we never really met them. If you remember, there will be the main budgets read in November, and then in July, we will come to Parliament for revisions, either upward or downwards, based on what the performance is, mostly downwards. You would see the revenue target slow down, and then we try to trim the deficit numbers, and then also want to reduce expenditure, and then, of course, the many other macro targets that we look forward to. And then in the next coming November, when they are presenting the next year's budget, they give us what is called now the outlook for the current year. So, for instance, in November 2022, we were given what the outlook will be for the full year 2022 numbers, because at the time they were presenting, it would have just been about data up to September or so. So they don't have the full year's figures up to that November, but they give us an outlook. But the reality is that even that outlook in November, most times they turn up exceeding those outlooks or doing worse than those outlooks. And 2022 is a typical example where we decided to do a certain deficit number, a certain revenue number, a certain expenditure number. And even at November, when we were giving the final outlook, you would say just 1 month left to go, we still found ways of exceeding them. So the ambitious fiscal targets normally set, some of us are tempted to say it is just a room being created. So, when you get a certain appropriation for a year, you cannot exceed expenditures in that area or beyond that target or whatever is approved by Parliament. So I guess it's a gimmick to try to get a higher approval budget ceiling approved so that you could do your maneuvers in it, really, and not really an intention to keep those fiscal targets. That is the conclusion some of us have drawn from the ambitious numbers that are put out all the time, because we've never really met them since this current administration took power from 2017. We've never really met our targets.
That's interesting. Gimmicks. At least you've explained the rationale behind some of these quote-unquote gimmicks or these promises that are not, or ambitious targets that are not being.
And those are entirely just my interpretation of it. I mean,
yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay. Also on the expenditure, you mentioned that the expenditures were lower than targeted. Is that correct? I may be.
Yeah. For half year 2023. Yes, okay. They are lower than targeted. Yeah.
Okay, so following on from that, and we know these are based on just their targets. I could set a target of spending 300 million cedis a year, and I only spend 200 million cedis. Somebody could clap for me. But then, if we check last year I spent only 50 million cedis. So any reasonable person can ask, then why are you in this year spending 200 million cedis? I guess my question is, how does this half year 2023 expenditure compare to previous years? Maybe more recently, just 22.
Okay. That will just quickly looking at 2021. The full year expenditure out 10, I think was 109 billion. Total expenditure excluding arrears was about 109.5 billion. And in 2022, we targeted to increase it to 133 billion. So that is about 20 billion increment or so. Okay, well, 165 billion. So that is about, call it 110, 160. So that is about 55 or so billion increment relative to 2021.
Wow. So 2021, it went up from 109 to 160. So
65.
we are looking at 165. So we are looking at roughly
55 billion
increase. Yeah. So roughly 50% increase in expenditure. That's quite steep for a country.
Exactly. And which is why I was suggesting in my summary that I thought it was just unrealistic budget.
Courage, actually, just hold on one second. Just also moving on from like the 2020, I know 2022. I know what you mentioned was the targets, and we may not have the actual at our fingertips, but we can bring that for a later discussion, right? But if it really ends at 160, all right, coming for a full year, 160, but this half year we are doing 200 million or 200 billion. I think there's how much did you say we've done this?
So I was just building a point. I'm saying that I was just giving some color where we came from. 2021, the projected or provisional out tenfold expenditure was 109.5 billion. In 2020, yes, that's the provisional out 10, yeah. In 20, yes. Okay. So that's how much we spent. Okay. Yeah, in 2022, that provisional out 10 increased to 165 billion. So that's about 55 or so billion increment. What you are in percentage terms looks like a 50% or so increment, really. Yeah. And in 2023, we increased it from 165, which was the provisional out 10, to 190.91 billion. So almost 200 billion, really. So between 2022 and 2023, we were expecting a growth in expenditure of just about 25, almost 30 billion is what we are expecting. So the growth rate seemed more reasonable in 2023 than 2022. And again, it goes to confirm what I said from the beginning, that we threw every caution to the wind in 2022 when everything, including the IMF, pointed to the fact that we needed to do a lot more consolidation. We threw caution to the wind. We went overboard, which is why we had the situation we had, really. So it looks like the 2023 budget started, if you like, realizing some of these mistakes and then adjusting them, especially when you expect to go under an IMF program. So for the half year period 2023, the target was 92.99 billion for the half year period. We ended up with 68.51 billion. So the difference is looking like 20 plus billion lower expenditure than what we targeted for the half year period, which is what I describe impressive and reflecting that we are back under consolidation, and it should give a lot more confidence to investors now that government is trying to rein in expenditure. And if you look at the quality of that expenditure cut, yes, a lot of it will be from interest savings from DDP, which you would argue government didn't play a role in, really. I mean, it is the sacrifices of individuals who have investment in DOG that may have led to that. But then you look at things like CAPEX, which they budgeted 16 billion for half year and then ended up doing under 50% of that. So 7.91 billion was what they did for the half year period against a target of 16 billion. And then other expenditures that had a budget of 7.4 billion, and they ended up doing about 3.9 billion for the half year period. So those are where you can say the fiscal efforts of government have gone into to try to reduce expenditures on those fronts. Of course, we can understand why wages and salaries went up, because post-budget approval, there was a 30% collar given to public sector workers. And with inflation and things already in town, you can expect that goods and services budget for public sector institutions would have increased a bit. And so you saw overshoots from those expenditure handles, but generally they were compensated for by the cut in capex and other expenditures. We yielded more than 20 billion reduction in total expenditure for the half-year period relative to the target, which I believe is impressive. And that is despite the fact that revenue underwhelmed for that period. We were targeting revenue of 64 billion and we ended up with 59 billion. So about 5 billion shortfall in revenue, but that was compensated for, in fact, overcompensated for by the over 23 billion cut in expenditure for the half-year period.
That's interesting. That's interesting. So I guess one way to look at it is it's as you said, consolidation. All right. So this then looking at it this way is just getting me thinking or wondering next steps. So our audience must be wondering what therefore is the hope really at this point. Ghana has gotten our economic situation has gotten really bad. But is there any information that you've gleaned that can give our audience some hope?
Well, the hope in the meantime is that we under program and the requirements, the quantitative targets, the structural benchmarks, and all the reforms envisaged under the program. I think this is about the toughest we've seen from recent programs that, since I gained consciousness about these economics, I think it's about the toughest reforms we are doing under a program. And a lot is happening in just 3 short years, really. And so our history under program has been that we've generally performed well. And so the expectation from now till end of 2026 is that we will behave properly. We will not see those overambitious expenditure projections again. And particularly for 2024, an election year, crunch election year, which the current government is talking about breaking the 8, and the other government is trumpeting, the other parties are trumpeting the failures of this government and the need for change. You would have been in a normal circumstance, you would have been expecting that we would break the bank again as a country for someone's attempt to probably retain power, break the 8 as the mantra is. But under program and with no monetary support, as we go forward, because there is a memorandum of zero deficit financing in place, with a lack of access to the capital market, international and even domestic, which I do not expect that we will regain access maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, really, because we would have to go through the full cycle of the reforms. You will shudder to say that we probably will not see those expenditure overruns motivated by the elections, really. So the fiscal agenda should be firmly on course. Akin to what we saw in 2004, when we were under HIPIC and we were going into second round of election. And that year, the budget targets were intact, were not exceeded. And that is largely because we were under program. You may also cite the exemptions of 2016, where yes, we're under program, but then still found ways to exceed our target. But I guess the IMF's watchful eyes this time around may prevent those things. Plus the fact that we do not have access to the capital market to even do a lot of borrowing. So if we will go on expenditure overdrive, it has to come from revenue, and we have to grow revenue internally. That is what makes 2024 fiscal budget in November quite an interesting one. We see what direction we are headed. There is this program hinge a lot on revenue growth and less of expenditure control. And so we've seen the revenue interventions in 2023. And in fact, IMF thinks there is a shortfall of about 1 percentage point of GDP in the revenue interventions that we did in 2023. So by all means, in November, when the 2024 budget is being presented, you may see 1 or 2 other revenue interventions aim at growing that line, really. And if we have to spend, it has to come from internally generated revenue and not the usual borrowing that could complicate the problems as we are seeing. I think at this point also, the monetary sector have realized they are complicit in the problem to some extent, even if they are defending that there was no other way around it. And it looks like the radar is on them now to try to tighten things. The memorandum is in place. You do not expect, in fact, with their losses and then the conversation around them, we can reasonably assume that between now and probably through 2024, they won't want to sidestep their mandate to the point where, because that sector is being watched carefully. Your Isaac Adongos and then the minority leaders and the many other people are watching that sector carefully and are always unveiling things in there. So they won't want to play in that arena, especially when IMF is also strictly watching them. There is a resident IMF representative in there trying to guide the process and watching them and how things are progressing really. These give me comfort, and a number of reforms also underway, including revision to the Bank of Ghana Act to define what emergencies mean, because it was that emergency provision in the Bank of Ghana Act that allowed for all the monetization of deficit in 2020 and 2022 really. So if we define what deficit emergencies are, and then you do not have the scope now to come in if there is one or two issues that do not necessarily qualify for emergency, then there will be a bit of sanity in there. We have changed from accrual accounting, in fact, from cash accounting to accrual accounting in our national budget reporting, where we are not working with deficit on cash basis anymore, but we are working with deficit on commitment basis. By that, we mean that if arrears are being paid, and then all those other things that do not directly fall into expenditure for the year in question are being paid, they all accounted for your deficit accounting. So then it means that we will eliminate deficits, in fact, arrears creation, which has been a big bane for this government and for past governments. And in fact, as we speak, we have a huge bill of arrears that is waiting to be cleared, really. And so the fact that we've moved from that cash accounting to accrual accounting, which will mean that your arrears and other below the budget expenditures will feed into your reporting for the deficits and then the primary balances for the year, we will be a bit more disciplined in there. There is also the move, which is one of the benchmarks for the mid-year review, in fact, the September review, to get all state agencies to start reporting their expenditures through GIFMIS. GIFMIS is the Ghana Integrated Financial Management Information System, which, if you like, want to match revenue to expenditure. So if there are no revenue sources, you are not supposed to generate expenditure, or every expenditure plan must be matched by a certain expected revenue inflow. Largely, a number of institutions, including some MDAs and other state agencies, are not operating within that framework, which is aiding the arrears creation. But with the shift now, and it becomes a requirement to get the next tranche of the IMF program, you want to get all of them under that umbrella. And then with that visibility and matching revenue to expenditure, you wouldn't expect those overruns going forward. These are the things that give us comfort that we will slow debt accumulation and we will get cleaner books maybe by the end of this program, which will be a good basis for us to start our rebuild from.
Courage. I appreciate that we have these structures in place, or we are starting to implement these things. But some of these things, or a lot of these things that you are saying, are things that we've heard before. And it just keeps reminding me about my concern that I have with Ghana in general. We see a lot, but don't do much. There's a lot of talk and not a lot of doing. Sending me back many, many years ago. I recall when this government came into power in 2017.
2017,
yeah. Words like what's it called, irreversibility, when we're ending that IMF program. These are all things that this agreements with Bank of Ghana, these are all things that we've spoken about, and it comes back to some conversations. I think the last time we had you here, or maybe the last two times, all about what should the government be doing. I think it all comes back to the issue of personal finance. Where
that is really what it is, Elikem.
Yeah,
that's really what it is.
Like, if I look at my own pockets and I say that, okay, fine, I'm not making a lot of profits. I keep getting in debt. I keep getting in a deficit, or I keep making losses, or I keep getting short. Let me relating it to personal finance. I keep getting short, so I have to go and borrow from other people to fund it. And after that, it's like half of my salary or more than half of my salary goes to paying off interest on money that I borrowed, not even principal, interest. Then I need to sit down and ask myself, you know what? I need to tighten my belt. Or better still, if we treat Ghana like a child, imagine we are parents and this is what our child is doing. And the child always comes for the revenue side from us as pocket money. You say, okay, my child, stop. No more buying of fancy clothes. No more fancy trips. Everything, instead of taking Uber, now you must take Trotro. You know, you need to downsize your life. You need to make sacrifices. When we're talking about cutting expenditure, I know the quantitative side, the IMF has this quantitative things. I just get concerned about whether the average Ghanaian feels the changes in those quantitative measures, whether they will see their quality, whether they will see their cost of living reduce. You know, so it's just a concern. I guess at this point we can only hope and pray that they will follow through. And then I really struggle to see how fine this IMF program in a short record time, fine, we'll get it done. But will we be back here in 7 years? It's a major question I'm asking myself, you know. But we'll keep the hope alive. We'll keep the hope alive. We'll keep these lessons.
Very valid concerns. And this is what we've been talking about as well, right? I don't think there is anything I've said on this call now that is very different from anything we've heard in times past or even we've said in previous calls. Like you rightly mentioned, things about gift mix, things about deficit monetization, fiscal dominance, and things about excessive borrowing and managing finances better. They've been with us. They've been with us. And so I do not look beyond 2026 in these assumptions I'm making. And I say 2026 because at least between now and 2026, you know, IMF is in town and they will ensure things are done. Beyond then we can see what happens. And so everything I have said now is with the assumption that by 2026, between now and 2026, we could see things look great a bit. But beyond then, of course, we can only hope that the structures are institutionalized and we are having probably better discipline built into some of these reforms so that there will be irreversibility. Your favorite word, right? There will be irreversibility and then and maybe through the cocoa board restructuring it was 7.83 billion or so they are targeting in total. The domestic dollar bonds that has accrued about 809 billion was also targeted. And now government found a deal with the pension sector for the exchange of about 31 or so billion, which was exempted from the initial DDP now. So if you put all this together, we're talking about 43 billion cedis being targeted under these exchanges. Now, the cocoa board and the dollar exchanges were supposed to have ended much earlier in August, I think 4th or so August, but government extended it by a further 2 weeks to allow the banks and institutions to seek approval from their credit committees or their boards and all of that to participate. Now, it was supposed to have ended, I think, on Friday, which is the 18th or so. But we've seen the summary from the cocoa board first saying that they received over 90% participation and they've allowed another administrative window of 5 days for the investors to complete the processes. So that window ends on the coming Friday, 25th, really. And that is the new expiration date. And we expect a final announcement now on the 28th of August of the result of the program. And settlement now shifts to 1st September or so. I think it's largely similar for the government of Ghana as well. Government of Ghana is also reporting that for the dollar bonds, they've achieved 91% success rate so far, or 91% of the amount they are targeting has been tendered. And they are also allowing an administrative window between yesterday and Friday for the processes to be completed. And then the settlement can happen on settlement can happen on 1st September going forward. What I'm yet to see something about is the pensions guys. I don't know if I've not cited. Okay, well, I think there is a release on that front as well. Quickly refreshing my page.
Yeah, well, Courage, while you do that, I just want to get some clarification. The one that you said is going to settle on, is it 1st or 5th September?
1st September.
1st September. Which group is that?
So that is both cocoa bills, which is about 7.83 billion, and the what do you call it? The domestic dollar bonds. You know, government
Domestic
issued,
dollar, okay.
yeah, some dollar bonds locally here. So those ones, 91%. Cocoa board mentioned 90%. They are mentioning 91%. And then for the pension sector also, I think it's largely same. They've harmonized the things now. So the new expiration date will be 25th August, with settlement now slated for 1st September. Success rate for this so far, I've not spotted what the success rate is so far. But then my deduction from these offers are that, one, already these are debts related to the same obligor, if you like, issuer. That part of it has been impaired already. And so if we are going strictly by the accounting rules, you will automatically even have to impair the remaining anyway, even if you've not tendered them. So the dollar bond will not be treated any different from the bonds that were exchanged anyway. And then the pension fund managers wouldn't treat the 31 billion the whole different from the bonds that were exchanged under DDEP. And so largely you would have to treat them with the same treatment, really. Now, if there is an opportunity to make them a bit more tradable, and you can make them also acceptable for your other operations, like for the banks, your repo transactions with the Bank of Ghana, or as collateral for any dealing with the Bank of Ghana or any other institution, I think you are better placed to do so, because the old bonds are recognized by the Bank of Ghana and the regulators for any purpose of regulatory interventions, really. So it's in their interest to exchange first and foremost. And for the terms being offered, I think they are largely identical to what the others got under the initial DDP. For the cocoa bills also, you are in the dilemma where you were getting 32% plus for cocoa bills 182 day. At a point, you were just forced to be rolling over because cocoa board doesn't have money to pay out. And they force you banks to even pay the individuals and assume that responsibility. So you were just in automatic rollover without end. If there is a chance to change it into something now that you can expect to cash out, even at lower interest rates, I think you jump at it. So the 13% being offered on that, again, and that the circumstances, I believe, will be largely accepted. And for the pensions exchange, in fact, the terms are not worse off compared to even the initial bonds. What government has done, I guess, is to preserve the patrimonial value of those investments, really. And so if you work the numbers, the yield to maturity on the 2027 and 2028 bonds that are now being offered to this pension fund managers is looking like your 21.5% levels. And if you look at even the total coupon being offered, both the coupon on the bond itself and then the non-principal or interest-only bonds that are offering 10%, if you put the two together, they are getting about 18.35, 18.5% as coupon rate per annum, which compares favorably to the average coupon rate of 19.1 on the old bonds, really. And plus, the government is giving you a premium of 15% on the principal you tender. So you put everything together and your returns on those bonds are even better than holding the old bonds the way they were. And I guess that is what is playing a role in the success factor of this second exchange that is not gaining a lot of attention in the media space as opposed to the initial one. And I guess the engagement that preceded the launch of these ones also have been much deeper and considered wide range of views and concerns of these participants. So it's largely just a window to complete the processes, really. And I expect that we should get above 90% participation for each one of the three offers going on now.
Okay, that's interesting. At least we've seen. I'm glad to hear that there's some progress on that, and there's light at the end of the tunnel on this issue. So yeah, I guess we could call it a wrap. Thank you so much for coming to give us this updates on the state of the Ghanaian economy, especially on government's fiscal position. That's the income and expenses of government, and activities happening on the debt restructuring side of things. To our audience, if you just joined, we've been having a conversation about the state of the Ghanaian economy, and we have our economist friend Courage joining us. And if anyone joined later, I strongly encourage you can listen to it from the top. We've learned a lot, as we always do, from Courage. So Courage, thank you so much for having us, for honoring our invitation to come and educate us.
My pleasure, bro. Always.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, we could call it a night, and on to the next. Looking forward to the next time we'll have you join us.
Definitely.
All right, Courage. Do take care.
Okay, sure. All right, see you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our thoughts. I hope you learned a thing or two and start practicing. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Clubhouse, and Facebook. And subscribe to our YouTube and podcast. Do tell a friend about Money Convos so we all become wealthy together. Talk to you soon. Bye.